PLLC.
Sorry, I just started the recording.
Do you want me to start over?
Yeah, why don't you just start over?
Okay.
This is for folks later.
So my name is Michael Kozak. I'm a lawyer. My law firm is called Wien and Kozak PLLC. Been practicing in housing for my entire career, pretty much my entire life. It's a long history there, but I grew up in New York City, and my parents had to deal with housing issues when I was growing up, and I ended up, going into the practice. And so we focus on really all housing issues affecting, tenants. Our practice has primarily been in New York City. I now have a satellite office here in Poughkeepsie, so, we specialize in rent regulation issues that covers rent control, rent stabilization, and the loft law, which is in New York City. So you guys don't have to worry about that here. But it's nice to meet you all, and hopefully I can provide some useful information.
Thank you. Yes, we are very lucky to have you here tonight. I know a lot of us have been eager to get some legal advice as we are trying to navigate this complicated legal bureaucratic system to win a rent reduction. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, I'm going to just go over the agenda. So I'm going to start off just by talking about, how we got to this moment, what's going on broadly, and sort of just fill in some of the details. I know a lot of you have been coming to public hearings that we had. A lot of you have come to Stony Run Tenant Union meetings that we've been doing. It's great seeing you all here tonight. And then once I'm sort of done talking about sort of like just the general how we get here, I'm going to be passing it off to Michael. He's been talking about the law itself, first big picture, and then getting into these forms specifically and how to fill them out and what to be thinking about when we do so. You've all been given a packet tonight. If you haven't, there's some up here in the front. We have more. And essentially in that packet, there's like two fact sheets that we've produced, or that that our lawyers produced, that are I'm going to put this on mute, by the way. And if anyone on the computer has a question, please just type it in the chat. I think that might make the most sense, or maybe I'll just mute folks. That might make even more sense. Sorry about that, y'all. Cool. So yeah, I'm going to talk about that, passing it off. They'll be talking about the actual forms and everything. And then at the end, we'll be talking about some of getting more into the lawsuit, and I'll mention what that is about in a moment, but we'll be talking about that more at the end of this meeting. Any questions on the agenda before we get started? Cool. Well, in the meantime, our restroom is back there. We still have waters and stuff. Feel free to leave at any point if you need to. We can always follow up and answer any questions that you have. And there's going to be a recording from this meeting that we will send to you all so you can review it later as well. Okay, well, let's just start off with talking about how we got here today. So in 1974, yeah, in 1974, New York State passed the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, right? And what that did is it created a process for rent stabilization, right? To basically try to deal with the rent crisis that was happening at the time, right? That law only applied to buildings with 6 or more units, right? That were built as of that date, no new buildings going forward. And at first, only cities and only New York City and surrounding cities and surrounding counties were able to opt into that law. So a few years ago in 2019, that the housing justice movement was able to expand that to all cities in New York State, right? And so Kingston was the first city to opt into that law. And the way you opt into it is a long bureaucratic process. It's been several years in the making. So, especially back at the beginning, Tyler and Citizen Action, who's back here, did a lot of work to get the city to do a vacancy study, right? Which essentially, that's the first step of the process to try to make sure to prove that there is a housing crisis, right? To say, oh, there aren't enough vacant houses in these units, right, that are covered by this law. And so that study showed that there was indeed a housing crisis, right? And that allowed the city council this summer to opt into that law, right? Does that make sense so far? Okay. From that point forward, the city created a rent guidelines board. That board gets, it gets to vote on how to adjust the rent, which is what the law allows them to do, right? So in, other places that have had these boards, right, these rent guideline boards, they never do a rent reduction. That's like unheard of, right? They only do, most of the time, it's like a maximum amount of rent increase, right? Even a rent freeze would be pretty dramatic for the New York City RGB board to do, right? And so we knew that the housing crisis was so dire here where we needed more than that, right? We could not settle for simply a limited increase of rent, right? The rent people have already is just way too unaffordable, right? So we, with all of you, right, and with other tenants around the city, organized to the rent guidelines board meetings that happened in October and November, and we won a 15% rent reduction and a 3-year look back period. And these were, really like the first time ever this has ever happened, right? So we're already just sort of branching into sort of unknown territory here. Any questions so far? Are we all still on the same? I'm just,
One question, if
yeah.
you could just break down
Yeah.
what the rent guideline board is composed of.
Right, yeah. So the rent guidelines board was appointed by the mayor. You had to apply to get on it. And there was some landlord representatives, some tenant representatives, and some members of the public, right? So for example, a Stony Run tenant, Carolina Soto, she's on, out here tonight, but she was on the board. One of our community organizers, Diana Lopez, for Kingston, she was on the board as a public member, right? So we had sort of, this mix of people on the rent guidelines board. And that board, it's like, because it's an appointed board, it's like considered like a quasi legislative body, right? So that board, voted for this huge rent reduction and this 3-year look back period, right? So what that means is the look back period specifically, what that means is that, if and they said it at 16% rent increases. So if your rent is more than 16% than what it would have been on January 1st, 2019, right? Then that is, you can sort of file these FMRAs, these fair market rent appeals, to try to win that money back, right? So that is basically what the FMRA process is, and what we're mostly going to be talking about today as we get into this. So all of you have gotten letters from your landlords that say what your base rent is, and that is your like rent registration form. It's the form that you need to use to file these FMRAs, and I'm sure Mike will be talking more about that because again, I don't know actually how to file them. That's why we have him. And yeah, I just lost my train of thought. Just I was going. I'm sorry. Where was I?
Got the letters from the landlord.
Right. Right. And so from the postmark that you got that letter, you have 90 days, right, to send them in, right? And so that is sort of a limited time window, obviously, which is why I'm so glad all of you here tonight, and why, especially in January, we're going to be doing our best to help people fill these forms out and get them turned in. Now, the big wrinkle in all of this is that after the board voted on this huge rent reduction, right, landlords sued the board, right, and the city over this whole thing. I'm sure you all have seen that, right? So what landlords, they're suing basically over 2 major things. And this is something we will get into at the end of tonight, right? But basically they're suing over the vacancy study, right, that started the whole thing, and they're suing over the decision itself. We don't, I mean, I'm not, we're gonna be talking to Marcy in a minute, and she's gonna be, she's another lawyer who's focusing on this stuff. And we'll be talking about this more then. But yeah, I mean, essentially that the vacancy study thing is probably not defensible, like the study was done well. The question is, of course, this sort of unheard of rent reduction and the 3-year look back period. So, it's possible we might have to change, the length of time that look back period goes to. There's like some things that we think might happen that way, but still at the end of the day, we feel, pretty confident that the law is solid, right? And the law allows these boards to adjust the rent. The problem is that the judge doesn't seem to have never adjudicated on this sort of decision before, right? And so we're going to have to fight a really hard legal battle in order to sort of convince him of that. And if he isn't able to, we'll have to appeal it. So that is sort of the situation there. It's going to be a sort of a legal process, but at the end of the day, like I think we do have a sound legal footing here. But it is hard when we're going up against the courts and landlords, right? We know that they're going to come at us with all they can and all their money and resources, right? So we are basically, for the many and citizen action and sort of tenants broadly are being represented by the legal services of the Hudson Valley, who has offered to step up and sort of represent us. The Attorney General's office is also obligated to represent the board because it's a quasi-legislative body. So we're sort of getting into this whole legal thing. But in the meantime, we still have to fill out those forms. So like we still have this window, no matter what happens, like we still have a limited time. Yeah.
Skip.
Right.
Skip.
It should be extended. And the Attorney General's office asked.
Oh, here, I got it.
to extend it, and he said no.
Something came.
Yes. So
You have to scroll. Oh,
I have a question as well
Just-
when
One
you're done
second.
there.
Yeah, Joe, here, I'll take one question out here and then I'll come.
Okay.
I didn't even know.
there's a link here.
Yeah, that we had 90 days
Right.
until like yesterday.
Right. Yeah, they don't want you to know.
They don't.
Right. Joanna, I think you had a question.
Right here.
Oh, you're muted now.
Yes. Okay. I have actually two questions because
Mhm.
I'm getting mixed messages on this 16% since 2019.
Right.
You just mentioned if our rent increased more than 16% between 2019 and now, so it's not each year 16%, but
Correct.
a total
It's
of
total.
16% or more between
It's total.
2019 and now,
Yes.
2019 and now.
Yes.
Okay, so, all right, so that's clear because I was confused about that. The
Mhm.
next thing, the 90 days letter from the landlord,
Yeah.
I never received one.
Okay, so I think, Michael, if you can answer what to do in that scenario in a minute, when I pass it over to you.
Okay.
One of the questions that I wanted Michael to answer because I don't know what to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It says they were sent out around after August 1st, so
Right.
maybe that is September 1st. We already had.
I don't think they sent them until, did anyone get them earlier than like November? Yes.
So, the earliest that they were due to be sent was October 1st. That's all.
Okay, so it's October. Does it say August there somewhere?
Mine says November 2nd. That's when they were sent to them.
So nothing was sent out, we're clear, nothing was sent out before October 31st.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have the letter here, finally. So the first date on there is the date that, department became subject to state rent.
Mm-hmm.
State, the rent stabilization, which was October 1st. And then it says, date of this initial registration is October 30th.
That's the date that they have. The 90 days starts at, right?
You want to see the letter? When is it mailed?
I think it's when they mail it.
Yeah, I'm gonna show
Yeah,
her
my
that.
envelope's postmarked November 2nd.
Yeah, I don't know that I have the,
So that's your guideline.
It doesn't matter what it says on the date of initial registration, is when you got it.
It's when they
Yeah.
postmark
When they
it.
mailed
Yeah, it's when they mailed it.
So, yeah.
What?
So it's
Yeah.
the date on here at the end, that's the date,
Yeah,
everybody.
Okay. Eric, you wanted to add something?
Can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? Okay, so folks with zoning run appear to be the only one that actually received it. The reason why I say that is because we've been in very close contact with both monsters here in Kingston. And, the only box of those letters is zoning run. I was asking, I asked, you know, in the way I could, without getting privacy, if any other complexes, et cetera, if they also receive theirs. And the answer is no.
Okay.
So,
Has anyone here not from Stony Run and has gotten your letter?
Not Stony Run.
Are you from Stony Run? And you have gotten your letter?
Well, I got a letter dated September 2021, but I got it in July 2022.
I think that might be a different letter.
So I did.
Yeah, I think that might be something else.
Yeah, yeah, that's what
What the,
The Stony,
That's old news. Didn't get it, and some people did. I think that's sort of the broad situation. And I will just briefly explain to folks on the computer. We were just answering some specific questions about when people, we're trying to figure out when people have been getting the letters. Some people haven't been getting them at all. And some people got them later. So yes.
What is the definition of the base rate?
I'm gonna let him cover that. Okay, so I think now we're getting into the actual stuff about the forms and everything. So I think that's when it's my time to step aside. But thank you all again for being here. I'm gonna pass it over to Michael. But yeah, that was just my brief summary of how we got here, where we've been. And at the end of this, we'll talk more about the lawsuit that I mentioned earlier. But for now, I'm gonna pass it over to our guest. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So do me a favor and hold your questions until I'm finished. I might answer everything you're gonna ask through my presentation. If I don't, then we can get to all the questions, all right? And if you're worried about forgetting your question, just write it down and then we'll just take the questions in order at the end, okay? Just keep things orderly and hopefully I answer everything for you guys. I'm gonna start with just like some super basic stuff. You guys are coming into it's kind of a new world here in terms of like landlord-tenant relationship, housing law, right? You know, in New York City, everybody seems to think that they know what rent control, rent stabilization is. You guys are, this is a new world for Kingston, all right? And, you know, people frequently come to me, they think they know what they're talking about in terms of rent stabilization and what it means and all that stuff. Rarely do they know it all accurately. And so, you know, I like to just assume, you know, that nobody knows anything accurately. And it's my job to, you know, answer your questions and make sure you're informed about what's going on. Okay. So just like basic principles about what rent stabilization is. Okay. So right, normal free market, you know, economy relationship between landlord and tenant is that the landlord owns their property, right? And let's just say it's a multi-unit apartment building, right? Landlord can rent an apartment to any particular tenant that they choose to rent to for whatever they want to, right? Whatever the market will bear for that apartment, they get to choose who they want to be in the apartment, how long they want to rent it to that person, be it for, you know, pursuant to a lease for a 1 year, 2 year term, or month to month, whatever, right? At the end of, let's just say it's a 1 year lease, right? At the end of that lease, the landlord can say, you know what? I choose not to rent this apartment to you anymore. You got to move on. You got to go someplace else. And if you don't, then they can bring an eviction case against you and evict you, right? So at the end of the day, all of the power is in the landlord's hands in terms of this relationship between you and the landlord, right? Your right to be in the apartment, to continue to live there, is subject to the landlord's decision as to whether or not to allow you to continue to live there or whether or not to agree to allow you to live there, okay? So that's the normal, right? The normal landlord-tenant relationship that people think of. Rent regulation is sort of governmental intervention into that relationship, right? So you've got the government now saying, you know what, we don't like this sort of power dynamic and we want to get involved in that, okay? And what rent regulation does, and I refer to rent regulation because it covers a few different types of schemes that exist in New York State. You guys have rent stabilization here, but there is rent control and the loft law in New York City. It's not applicable here, but I just refer to rent regulation, generally speaking, okay, as this governmental intervention into this relationship, okay? And what it says is basically, you have a right to continue to live in this apartment for the rest of your life, potentially, okay? The landlord can't just choose to say, you know what, I'm not going to rent it to you anymore because, you know, I don't like you, or I want to just charge, you know, more in rent. They don't have the ability to do that. It gives you a right to continued possession and occupancy of your home. And the government says how much the landlord can charge rent-wise for your unit. The landlord can't just make it up. There is a maximum rent set called base rent, all right? And then from there, there can be increases, statutory increases, and those are the maximum by which the landlord can increase the rent over time. Okay, everybody got all this? Pretty clear stuff, right? So now in terms of how those increases work, you know, this is where things get a little like, you know, a little bit into the weeds. And so I'm just going to talk about the way I understand things to be set up in Kingston currently. And, you know, again, it's a little fuzzy because of this lawsuit and, you know, what's going to happen with that. But so the rent stabilization was possible to be available in Kingston by virtue of a law that was enacted in June of 2019. Okay. In June of 2019, the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974 was expanded so that cities below 1 million people could actually bring it into their cities. All right, it didn't exist before. So and basically what the law said was, all right, we're going to allow rent stabilization for buildings that were built before 1974 that contain at least 6 dwelling units or housing accommodations, right? 6 apartments. So if you meet those basic criteria, right, the building and all of the units in the building are eligible to become rent stabilized. Okay. And so, you know, Kingston has now adopted that, and the way the law was enacted in June of 2019 was to say it's up to Kingston to determine what the rents are going to be, right? We talked about what those legal rents are going to be and how they're going to increase over time and blah, 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 right? And so Kingston, you know, created this agency called the Rent Guidelines Board. All right, it exists in New York City as well, and this same title. And what they do is they basically determine how those rents are going to increase over time. Okay, and but for Kingston, they also had to determine what the base rent is going to be. Now, the law actually says in it how the rent is supposed to be determined. And basically what it said was that as of the enactment of the law in Kingston, the base rent would be determined based upon what the last rent that was agreed to be paid pursuant to the last lease in effect, as of the date that the law was enacted in Kingston. So I honestly, I forget the date that it happened in Kingston when they adopted it, but whatever the lease was, in fact, as of that date, that would set the presumptive legal rent for the unit. Now, the law also says, though, that tenants can challenge that rent, okay? To say, I don't think that that rent is an accurate reflection of what the fair market rent was for this unit as of as of the date you know, that the law was enacted. Okay, so what the law says is that you can submit a challenge to whatever that presumptive legal rent was, right? And so the presumptive legal rent is what we're working off of, is what the landlord says on these forms the initial rent was for these units, right? You get these forms, the RR1, the landlord is required to register all of the buildings and units with this agency called the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal. listing every single unit in every single building that's subject to rent stabilization in Kingston, and listing what the the unit numbers are and who the tenants are of those particular units and what they believe those rents to be. Okay, that's the DHCR registration, the RR1 form that some of you have received. Okay, so that sort of sets a presumptive legal rent for the unit that the tenants can then challenge and say, actually, no, that's not the accurate legal rent, the legal base rent for the unit. And that I'm going to challenge that through this thing called a fair market rent appeal. And the fair market rent appeal, right now, the way Kingston has set it up is they're saying that the determination as to that base rent is what the fair market rent was for the unit as of January 1, 2019. All right, and this is, we can get into the lawsuit a little bit, but that's presumably right. Like right now, Kingston is saying that's what you base the rent on. Okay, and then that would continue to be in place to present until the next renewal of your lease, right? So let's just say, for example, that the fair market rent as of January 1, 2019 was $1,000. All right, let's just say that, okay? That would, under the law, remain in place for all intents and purposes to date, right? And the rent stabilization law requires the landlord to renew your lease, right? And, if it's coming to expire, right? And so the question is, what is your rent going to be upon that renewal, right? What's the next step? Now, the Rent Guidelines Board, they said, well, upon that renewal, the rent's actually going to go down, right? We're going to drop it 15%. So they're going to roll back of the rent rather than an increase of the rent upon the renewal. So okay, so that, I think that's sort of covers like how like the current system would work. This is my reading of it, by the way. Okay, and so there's also this part of it that says that you can apply for actually, before we get there, in order to, let's just say that the landlord has on the form $1,200, okay, that they've got listed on the RR1, that they believe that the proper legal regulated rent for your unit is $1,200. And you want to say that as of January 1, 2019, I believe that the rent was actually $1,000. Okay, and so you would then be entitled to file this form, the RA 89, right? Which everybody has in their packet at the end. Okay, this guy here. Okay, and challenge what the landlord has listed on their, what I'm calling the registration. Okay, I'm calling the registration form. That's the RR1. I'm going to just refer to it as the registration. Okay, so you can file this at the DHCR and say that I believe that the rent for my unit should have been, and as of this date today, would remain $1,000 a month, right? And you do that based on a claim that in fact the free market, the fair market value of your unit for a comparable unit, right, in the area or in your building, for example, was in fact $1,000. You could also show that your unit was being rented for $1,000 as of that date. So you would want to submit evidence to show that in fact that is what comparable units were renting for as of this particular date and time. Now, this form is a little, they're adopting a very New York City approach with this form, I'll tell you, right? And it's not all that helpful, because this is a form that's used for, typically used for claiming a rent overcharge. And they're now saying, well, let's use this form, not just for the purposes of saying whether I was in fact overcharged, but for the purposes of determining what the rent was as of a particular date. And so you'll see things in this. So for example, I think the first page is fairly straightforward, right? You fill in your last name, your first name, your middle initial, mailing address, blah, 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 right?
It'll be helpful for us to.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, is it the primary person or is it? I'm just by myself, so.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. All right, well, they're working on that, all right? Does everybody have this in front of them? Yeah, okay. So section 1, right, tenants, last name, first name, right? If there's multiple tenants, you know what you can do, right? It allows you to attach evidence. If you go to the third page, right, you can attach documents to this. This isn't, you know, all you're restricted to in terms of your filing, right? You could attach an addendum to this, right, that says, you know, list of other tenants or complete list of tenants, and list everybody, you know, who's an actual tenant of the unit. Now, a tenant of the unit is somebody who's on the lease, named on the lease, or if you are never had a lease, if you're a month-to-month tenant, somebody you know, who's issued rent invoices and who paid rent, right, for the unit, right? That's typically, right, you know, the things that you look for in terms of determining if somebody is an actual tenant of the unit. Okay. Why don't we go to page 1 of the form? Yeah, just go down some more. So, all right, so, right, list the subject building, right, is, right, your address, your building, apartment number, right, listed there. Prime tenant, yeah, that's the person on the lease, the person we were talking about. Okay.
Can people see this all right? I tried to light up.
All right. You know, subtenant, I think everybody's going to ignore hotel SRO, right? Roommate is probably not going to be applicable because, right, really only a tenant would be the one who would have a right to file this. So you're probably going to be there, right? Prime tenant, scree or dree, I don't think is applicable, so you can ignore that. Section 8, not going to be applicable. Cooperative apartment, not going to be applicable. 8, right? I moved into the subject apartment on, you know, whatever day, right? You fill in the date, and then, you know, with a written lease, okay? You had a lease for how many years? The lease started, let's just say, we started January 1, 2019, and expired December 31, 2019. You could fill that in, and then, you know, a rent of whatever is on the lease, $1,000 a month. Or if you didn't have a lease, right, just moved in as a month-to-month tenant, then just, you know, what you paid as, you know, during that month-to-month tenancy at the beginning. Can you go this? Okay. And current rent is what you're paying now. Electricity is or is not included in my rent. Most people should know the answer to that. You know, it's typically in your lease, whether or not, you know, your utilities are included. All right. Mailing address of the owner or the agent. Right. You should know that. If you don't, there's you know, check your rent invoices, right, or your lease, then put the PO box in.
That would be the management company versus the landlord, right? We have one.
The owner or agent, right? It could be the owner. If you don't know who the owner is, then whoever you deal with, the managing agent, right? You
That
can-
would be on the form they sent us too, right?
That'll be there too. Yep, absolutely. Okay, fill in their address there, okay? So can we go back up for a sec? All right, so the overcharges here, 13, okay, so there's some complicated stuff in here that you're not gonna fill in. The only thing you're gonna check probably is this box here, fair market rent appeal, right, for Kingston only. Okay, now I'm complaining about rent overcharges. I would, if I were you, put in January 1, 2019 to present, right? You could just, you know, write it in, if you're doing it by hand. If you're doing it online, there's an online way to submit this to the DHCR, which is, it's in the packet. You'll see there's a link there. I would just put in the date of the, you know, the date that you're filing, okay? Yep,
I thought I just heard people saying that they don't get copies of the receipt for their rent. Is that true? Yeah. No. That's true.
Yeah.
Checking that out.
no, so long as, well, so we're gonna get there. So let's go down. Okay, so additional information, what are the rental events you believe caused the overcharge within the last 6 years? So, all right, so here's where things get like a little, maybe a little confusing about how the Rent Guidelines Board in Kingston has handled this rent overcharge issue. Okay, so the fair market rent appeal is about, one, determining what your current rent is today, right? Going forward, okay? But you can also seek to recover overcharges if you were charged in excess of what you were, what the landlord was allowed to charge you going backwards, okay? But so let's just say that, going back to our example, that the rent as of January 1, 2019 was the fair market rent was $1,000, and the DHCR says it was $1,000 a month. All right. The way the Rent Guidelines Board in Kingston has dealt with the rent overcharge issue going back in time is to say that if you were charged in excess of 16% above that base rent, right, then you were overcharged for that amount, right? So 60% on $1,000 a month is what, $160 a month, right? So we would say, right, on that example, that the base rent was 1,000, right? But the landlord was charged you, let's just say that they charged you $1,200 a month during that period of time, then they would have overcharged you by $40 a month, right? And you can seek an overcharge and to get back that $40 a month for the period of time since January 1, 2019 forward that you were charged at, whatever, you know, however many months that was. That's my reading of what the Rent Guidelines Board did. You know, I'm not going to call it gospel, but like, you know, I'll say like that's, you know, I've tried to sort all this stuff out, and I think that's probably the closest conclusion to what actually all of this means. So you can, in this section, or if you want to include some addendum about it, say what you believe you were overcharged, right? Say, you know, that the Rent Guidelines Board said that, you know, I could seek overcharges if I was charged in excess of 16% more than the base rent from January 1, 2019 forward. And I believe I was, because, you know, I believe the base rent was $1,000 a month. And I was, you know, I paid $1,200 a month. And so there was a $40 overcharge for that period of time, right? That's additional information, your allegations, your claim, right? Like this is where you state what you believe to be the legal violation upon which you are seeking relief, right? So, and then when we go down, we'll get to, don't go there yet, but when we get there, we'll get to like what you actually have to submit to show that in fact this is what happened, right? And that the DHCR is entitled to award you this rent overcharge, okay? So security deposit, if you have a security deposit in excess of 1 month, can we actually go back up for a second? So we go a little bit further. So rent overcharge, security deposits here, okay? The law in New York is currently that landlord can only keep 1 month's security. Okay? If from 2019 forward. So if you moved in after June of 2019 and they ask you for more than 1 month security, that's illegal. That's an overcharge. And you can complain to that and they have to give you the excess back. Okay? So you could check that box as well, right? And then go down and then write in 15, I am being charged, you know, whatever it is, right? Whatever that excess is there. And then the DHCR will make a determination that the landlord is liable to you for that excess. Okay. Security deposit of blank was paid to the owner, right, on this date, right? So when you typically when you move in, right, you have a lease, whatever, you know, you pay him first month, last month, security, you know, maybe one check, won't be multiple checks, right? We're gonna get to what you have to submit, but ultimately, like you're gonna have to go back probably, you know, and get your bank, you know, account records, get your cash checks, right? And submit that stuff, you know, with all this, okay? If you vacated the apartment, did you use your security deposit to pay part of the rent? Yeah, I would just leave it blank, right? Because it's not applicable. 16, has the complaint, this application been raised in court? That's a no, right? I mean, theoretically, you can sue in court for all of this stuff, but because of the way this is all being handled, you have to do it through this form. Okay, so I think, all right, let's go down. All right, so rental history. This is just the data on your leases, right? And then this is going to be the data on your what you paid in rent, what you paid in rents pursuant to those leases. Okay, so lease period, right? You know, just whatever. Let's say it's January 1, 2019 through December 31, 2019, or whatever, $1,200 a month. And if there was security deposit, write that in there, right? So that's one lease. The next lease, January 1, 2020 through December 31, 2020, right? Same thing, just you're filling in, you know, this information there. And then 18 is what you paid in rent. Going back 6 years. Okay. Now, well, the form says 6 years. You don't have to go back 6 years.
My
You're
landlord wasn't even, my landlord.
Don't-
was
don't-
6 years.
Don't worry about it. You only have to go back to January 2019. Okay. Every month, boop, 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 you're gonna fill that in, right? So you gotta go back and check your records, right? What did I pay? You know, what you're gonna want to do, like, you know, you bank with Chase, you can go online at Chase and get your bank statements, right? And that'll have hopefully copies of your cash checks. If they don't, go down to the bank branch and ask them. Right? I want all of my cash checks for the past 3 years. Right? And they'll give you copies of that stuff. Okay, they'll give them to you. It might come at a little fee, but you'll get them. Right?
We're gonna send in the copies of those for this.
We're gonna get there. But yeah, but this is the data, right? You're gonna use the information from the checks and fill it in, right? And then let's go down. All right, carefully review the below indicate which documents you're attaching for review to substantiate your calculations. All right, so evidence attached. This is where we get to like what you're submitting to prove your claim. So
I have a question.
we'll get there. We'll get there. Just give me a minute. So for the overcharge thing, right? To show that you were overcharged, it's pretty straightforward. Like it's my leases, rent receipts, if you got them. If you didn't, it's okay. Not fatal, okay? Canceled checks, we talked about, right? Front and back. Getting those canceled checks, money order receipts, like if you have those. You want to submit all of those things as attachments. Okay? Organized. Well organized. Keep your stuff organized. Have a little cover sheet, right? Leases, right? Cover sheet, like, cash checks, whatever, right? Like just keep everything nice and organized. So when they're reviewing it, it's all real clear to them. It's in chronological order. There's nothing missing. It's not just like a page of a lease, right? Like to the extent that you can, like all pages of the lease, right? Not cut off documents. It just be, a nice, full, complete, organized presentation. All right. That's for the overcharge thing. Now, what's not listed here is anything about the determining what the fair market rent should have been for your apartment as of this date. And I'm gonna be like frank for you right now. I don't know exactly how to do it. I know what I would do if I were representing tenants on this. I would go and I would get information on comparable apartments. Right? I mean, I think if that's the smart approach, I'd figure out what, if you weren't in your, what's that?
Just in the city.
In City of Kingston, right? In your building and in the surrounding area, right? And it might be useful to connect with, for example, like I don't know what the listing services are for, rental apartments in Kingston, if there is such a thing, right? In New York City, it's street easy, right? You can go on there and you can see all of, the historical, listings in a particular area. But, maybe there's, real estate broker, who knows, I don't know if if there's much of a prevalence of real estate brokers here. There are, if you want to like get detailed about it, appraisers who do this kind of thing. But you want to get some data. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just found out tonight that we needed this sort of data to file this. So I think what we can do is try to find those numbers, especially for the larger complexes, right? Like Stony Run and Dutch Village and Fairview. I'm sure we can figure out how to do it with the smaller buildings as well. I don't know how many smaller buildings, but I think at least for the big ones, we can find that information out. And we can get working on trying to figure it out and set it up.
Yeah, so the one thing about this is, it's important. Has to be submitted timely, right? Like you have 90 days from when you receive the notice to file this thing at the DHCR. And the court order right now says the DHCR can't do anything with this. They get it, but they can't do anything with it. So I think what's probably going to happen is they'll be filed. They'll issue a docket number, okay, which is like a tracking number for it, right? And they'll let you know what your docket number is. and they'll probably send it to your landlord also, but I don't think I can do anything with it other than that. It'll just sit there. So, but you still have to, you still gotta get it in this 90-day period. And in some senses, you know, I said to Jim before we started, I was like, you know, in some senses, what the judge did is actually a good thing. He said, how is that a good thing? I said, because now you have time, right? Now we have time. It's gonna sit there at the DHCR for a while, probably while this case gets prosecuted. Now, you got time to go and get this additional information about, you know, what those rents were as of that particular date. Okay, so what I'll say is, right now, I wouldn't worry so much about getting that data before you file this. I would just get it in and then supplement it later on in due course, which you can do. Okay, so so the one thing I just want to note, and I hope I'm like not stepping on any, you know, the toes of any other attorneys involved in all of this, is my read of this lawsuit is that there are some issues with how the Kingston Rent Guidelines Board handled setting the determination of the base rent. I think it's unlikely that it's going to be January 1, 2019. That was before the law was even possibly capable of being enacted in Kingston. So to go back before that date, I think is unlikely to work. I think that they'll probably, I don't know what's going to happen with Kingston, what they're, you know, how they're going to handle it. But, you know, if there were, you know, if I were looking at it, I would say like at the earliest, right, the date that the ETPA was expanded in June of 2019 would be a very defensible date if you were, you know, handling this in court. So when you are doing the inquiry, right, as to what the fair market rent was on a particular date, I would also be looking as of June 2019. I would look at January 2019 and June 2019, because you're getting it in, right? But you also want to give the DHCR some options as to how to handle it, and not say, well, we're just going to reject it because January 2019 is not the effective date, and you didn't give us any information about what was going on in June 2019. All right. All right, so go down. And then, you know, date, sign. Form must be mailed or delivered to the DHCR. All right, mail it in. Now you can also do it online, which may be easier. I'm not sure how the online system works in terms of submission of documents. They probably have to be PDFs that are attached. So if you're not like proficient, you know, with that stuff, you know, maybe you just want to do it by hand or do it by mail.
Certified letter. Just pulled up the certified. Do we have to send it certified?
No. But I would, if I were you, I would probably want to send it by some way you could track. Yeah, yeah, not, you don't want to just like throw it in the mail and hope for the best, right? Also, keep a copy for yourself. Right, when you make this thing, again, it's like the cover application, then the attachments, right? You're gonna send that in, you wanna have your own organized set. I'll tell you right now, I can't tell you how many times I've had tenants come to me, say, oh, I handle a filing, and they show up in my office, and it's just like a stack of scrambled papers all over the place, and I'm like, what do I do with this? All right, keep yourself organized. So, okay. The other question was what to do if you haven't gotten the form yet. Could be the landlord hasn't registered you yet, right? Hasn't even filed it with the DHCR. That could be if that's happened. And the easy answer as to how to figure that out is to make a request to the DHCR for the rent registration. for your building and your unit, which you can do. I think you can do it online.
What's the best way to do that?
I have to confirm whether you can do it online, because typically I advise tenants to go to 25 Beaver Street in downtown Manhattan.
Right.
But that's not happening, right?
Right.
And so, I think we'll just have to confirm whether or not that can be done online, and maybe there's a way to distribute.
So we'll
The
follow,
instructions on that.
I'll follow up with y'all and I want you to figure out how to request.
And the DHR is fairly good about producing that fairly quickly, right? And so once you get it, if they have registered, right, but you haven't received the form yourself, I would just submit the RA 89 as quickly as possible, because you don't know what the landlord's telling the DHCR about when they actually served it on you, right? The registration is supposed to say, the DHCR record is supposed to say when the registration happened. So when you get that, if there is an actual registration, it'll show the date that registration was submitted. And then you'll know, roughly like what your 90-day period was, but you definitely want to get that in quickly. And, I would, if you haven't gotten the form, I would just submit the request for the registration, like immediately. Like landlords do all kinds of shady stuff, and you don't know, right? If they're like submitting some false proof that they mailed it to you or something like that, we see all kinds of things.
What happens if you got it and you don't do anything with it?
Then they're gonna set the rent based on whatever the landlord says. And then you'll be barred. The 90 days passes and you don't challenge, that's it, you're done,
Forever.
forever.
They say.
What if it says $10,000 a month on it?
That's what you're gonna
That's what you're talking about.
do.
So, yeah.
People don't know this, but you can call them up. They have a number. And you get through it, you hold on a little bit, and they ask you what's your address and all that stuff, and they'll send you a form if you don't have it. You gotta tell them the information, they put it in the mail that day. That's what they call it. I got a question.
You're good, go ahead.
With this look back, it's only 2019. And if somehow we win that 15%, well, how does that work? They're gonna give you money back in 3 years, but
The 15% is going forward. Going forward, right? The fair market rent appeal to determine what the rent is today. Right? Let's say the fair market rent appeal says, again, you determine it's $1,000 a month. That's what the rent was in January 2019. That's what was through to today. Okay? Now the Rent Guidelines Board is saying that going forward with your next lease, right? Because the landlord has to renew your lease perpetually, and the Rent Guidelines Board says what the increases can be on those leases. So on your renewal lease, for 60% down, right? So we rolled back down to 8,500, right?
Yeah, so thank you for addressing.
Not 85, 80, excuse me, $850. Sorry.
Right, so thank you for addressing the actual numbers, but the forms, right, they're missing a lot of services or things that mention, maybe pets or ESA, appliances, gym, swimming pools, all, and et cetera, right? Like Stony Run, pretty much just wrote, the base rent plus,
Trash.
plus
Yeah.
trash.
The only refrigerator is the only one on ours that have to be.
Do we have to worry that if we don't include, say, we have stove and refrigerator, we got trash pickup, et cetera, that, the presumption is that those things are not included?
Not for the purposes of this, okay? This is about determining what the rent is,
Okay,
okay? You can challenge, right, the listing of what the services are, right? That are included in the rent. And there's a way to actually seek a rent reduction if they diminish those services or attempt to charge you for them. Okay,
Like
but
what
that's,
he's saying is on our sheet that we got, it says we only have a refrigerator and a stove that's included in it, but we have a dishwasher. That's their dishwasher attached to their property.
I would have no problem with you including in the form, right, information to say that the registration failed to state all of the services that are included. I'm just saying that I don't think that the DHCR here is gonna make a determination on that.
So the
Right.
question I think is, can we challenge what's on these registration forms if they're inaccurate?
Yes, Yeah.
How do we do that?
there's a different application form for that.
Isn't it the same form? They still have to-
I don't think so.
Like, if it's a different application, you don't get everything at the same time. Where do you get that phone from?
Yeah, the DHR will have that, but I don't think it's in here. I don't think it's this form. So I'm pretty sure,
It's on their website, they've got a bunch of.
I'm pretty sure there's
forms
the
on
question
that site.
14 in the FMRA. Like, it's like the answer
Yeah.
specific one for it to be this specific kind of
Um,
challenge. That was at least what I understood from this fact sheet.
.ny.gov.
Right.
no,
That's it.
I'm in the conclusion there, but
Yeah.
I don't think that that's,
Like, I have tenants who want to file registration, what's filed two separate already not applications.
And
You know
then
what that
when you saw all those forms in there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Change it to
It's H
yeah, I would assume it's as to the rent.
dot NY
So,
dot.
Not like
gov.
additional,
yeah,
I think what it is that they're including services in their rent that
And
don't.
when you go in there, you're gonna go
Definitely.
under
but they're
that
not charging
rent
for extra services. It's
stabilization,
not
there's like a rent
Oh.
stabilization.
Overcharge
You're gonna click
situation.
on That,
I
and
think,
then it'll list the forms that would.
okay, so wait, just for some clarification, so we're talking about, like, there's been a $25 increase, right? In Stony, this, in the base rent that y'all got from
Yes,
Stony,
they
right?
But no, that you can challenge.
Right.
That's
Okay.
different. I thought you were just stating that like they just,
That, when it comes to, obviously all of the appliances aren't listed, but also like, right now, the heat, the hot water and the gas is all included. That's not listed on here.
yeah, no, you should include that in what's the additional information section.
About
Okay,
Right, so it's
Yeah.
question 14
yeah.
in the,
14.
in the form.
Basically, you can have questions, not sure about something, just add it in.
I would have just attached a sheet and write off and staple it right to the. Yeah.
Don't handwrite, by the way. Don't handwrite. Type it up, okay? That's fine. Yeah,
So, I had help and I already filed one, but the property manager, I was in the office on something totally different. Stated to me that the landlord knows about my complaint already. Should I be fearful of something or that they already know about this complaint? That they can do something or,
well,
I mean, they all know it. So,
I mean, look, it's a reality of being a rent stabilized tenant that you are not gonna be liked. Period.
I will say
You know?
that you are protected from eviction, right?
Oh, surely,
Yeah, and,
no.
and like retaliation, right? So like, like you have legal protection.
it was only verbal.
Right, right. You have legal protections, like they are not allowed to retaliate against
No.
you.
We can, look, there is a
They
whole,
were in the words.
yeah, there's a whole set of things that you can do, right? And there are protections from harassment, right? Like is a word that's thrown around a lot in by tenants, it's a mistreatment by landlords, but, I think that encompasses a broad, right, set of misconduct by a landlord towards you, but, ultimately, right, like they can't retaliate, they can't diminish services, they can't cut off your heat or hot water, like all that stuff is absolutely illegal, right?
It's RA
Yep.
608.
There,
Hey.
yeah, there's, yeah,
You're the form girl. I'm reading mine.
there's all kinds of applications.
Right,
that could
there's
be
all
done.
kinds
Rent,
of
rent
stuff on that
reduction, harassment. So what I'll say is this, right? Like, they can't evict you. Your rent's stabilized. This is your home. You have a right to be there. And you just need to feel comfortable about that, right?
I
Like,
just haven't had a lease. Yeah.
but the law says you have a right to live there. Even without a lease, you have a right to be there. It's the landlord's obligation to give you one, but even without one, that doesn't mean you don't have a right to be there, because the law says that you have the right to be there. Potentially again for your entire life if you choose to. So long as you want to be there. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I can't find my old lease for 2019 and 2020, and the office, I requested them from the office. They don't have it either because they've exchanged landlords and they completely abolished everything that was in the computer system. And I don't remember what the rents were.
Would you have
So-
a record of what you paid?
Yeah, I mean, so is the bank statement enough information? I know my rent goes up $100 every year.
The checks, that's where you should be,
Okay,
the actual checks.
well, I don't write checks. I do the automatic payment through the Rent Cafe and the online,
Okay, do you get invoices?
the statements, yes,
Submit
from the
invoice-
bank,
Submit the invoices, and then the bank statements.
correct.
The one thing, if you're gonna submit bank statements, right?
That's the
Yeah.
only thing I have is the bank statements.
Right, but if you're gonna do that, you don't have to include all of your
Right.
financial information.
Right.
You can redact. Everybody know what this word redact is?
Yes,
Black, right? The information on there that is not relevant, right?
okay,
This is like all of the lines that, and the transaction amounts and the balances
Mhm.
that aren't relevant to rent or utilities. And also all but the last four of your account number.
okay,
So wait, we have
thank you.
here had their hands raised, and I have two questions from folks in the chat. So, I answered your question. Right? Yeah, you want to ask her?
I have a question. If you, don't want to sign the lease and you want to do month to month, are they allowed to charge you an extra 2 months for that?
I'm not sure what you mean. So,
Okay, so, originally I didn't want to, sign a new lease, so I wanted to do month to month. If I went month to month, it would be an extra 200.
Right, that's a Stony Run thing that's happening. So they gave us a letter that tells us if you sign early, then you'll pay this. If you wait until it's time for it to renew, then you're gonna pay this. And if you go month to month, you're just gonna go, they're like full out, like $2,600, like $1,000 more than you owe. That's a real thing where we live. So.
they can't charge whatever they want. They can charge what the law allows them to charge.
So all that's illegal.
Okay, so I have two questions from the chat. The first is, what if they paid their rent and utilities in the same bill? And so all their bills have the rent and utilities together.
How do you? So you're talking about a situation where the rent is not included in the utilities, I presume, right? And so I assume then you're somehow notified of what the utilities are, right?
They change every month, so it could be the same thing.
Well, okay, but my question is, how you find out, right? Like,
They give you, yeah, it's in your statement.
there you go.
Okay,
So you
so
should-
that
so you
answers
say
that question. Okay, and then my other question is, someone paid under market rent in 2019, but their rent has gone up 30% since. Like, what is, can they still file, should they still file an FMRA?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. But they wouldn't be able to use the same data
Well, I mean, you get to look at the registration and see, maybe the registration is good for this person.
Right.
I mean, it depends on what's listed there.
Right.
So,
So they should still do it and have everything in there and, okay.
Yep.
That's all, what, if anyone else in the chat wants to have questions, I'll drop them and then we're gonna do something in the written questions.
So I have a question. So if you, don't know whether or not you're eligible for the rent reduction because of just missing data or whatever, do you recommend just fill out the form anyway and let the chips fall when they may?
definitely,
Let them figure it out.
just get it in there.
Right.
Just get it in there, because if you don't do it, you're barred and, just get it in process.
You're either gonna say, yes, you're eligible or you're not.
Yeah, what's the worst case? Worst
Right.
case is, they go with what the landlord put on there, right? But, you want to try to do better than that, so.
Yeah, I just want to make it, we had a brief chat earlier, but I just want to be clear on something. As I said, I moved in July of 2021. I still look back to January 1st of 2019.
Yes,
And that would be what they call the base rent. What it should be. Okay.
Yeah.
And if my rent has gone up more than 16% since then, I qualify.
now you qualify, you have an overcharge in that instance. You qualify no matter what, right? If you are, let's just be clear here. If you are living in a building in Kingston that was built before 1974 and has at least 6 units, you're rent stabilized,
Right.
period. Period. All we're talking about here is what your rent should be and whether or not you have an overcharge plan. All right?
What if you're on subsidized rent and you have to show proof of what you paid, then you have to show proof of what either HUCO or Section 8, you gotta do all of that.
Typically, you still get a rent invoice showing, right, like what the complete rent is, and then
Yeah.
part of it's paid by,
But I,
know,
yeah,
so you submit the invoice, right?
Yeah.
So,
but what I pay isn't always.
understood, yeah, you submit what you paid, and do you get some record of what the subsidy is paying?
Yeah, I have a paper.
Then submit that.
Okay.
So I was questioned a lot when I was canvassing, our complex. People felt like this didn't affect them because they just moved in. And those new, transplants in, their rents are way higher than people like me who've been there 14 years, or 5 years, or 6 years. We got new people coming in, an apartment my size, spending $2,400, paying $2,400.
Yeah,
So those people are eligible to get, because that's really a lot.
everybody's eligible, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay,
Uh,
Bill?
yeah,
So when we define report, so are we?
guys,
Okay, can we do?
all right, go.
Because they don't think they're eligible.
All right, we have a question here.
When we file these reports, the landlords receive a copy of everyone.
Yes, the DHR will send it to them. You submit to the DHR and the DHR submits it to the landlord.
Because they make contest the information.
Yep. That's right. And then that comes back to you, by the way. Yep, and then you can respond to that. Yeah.
It sounds like some tenants are gonna file FMRA with the rent, they wanna challenge their initial regular rent. But other tenants have seen their rents go up by $25 since August 1st. They're challenging the registration form. Do they have to file 2 different RA 89 forms or 1 combined form? We prefer to file separately.
That's honestly, it's not clear to me.
I will say the fact sheet that we have from my say that they have to be separate.
You saying two, then I would submit 2, right? Do a fair market rent appeal and do an overcharge. It's the same form. You're submitting basically the same thing, but you're just asking for different relief.
So down in that section there. Okay, so if you get rent reduction, then you saying that if you, then your next form would be checked off at rent reduction.
This is not, no, this is
I
not.
think it's, so I saw it was filled out the other, does that sound right?
So what I would do is one for fair market rent appeal,
Right,
and then another one for other, and then in 14, say also, you want to say you were seeking a rent overcharge. And then in addition to stating, you know, the basic facts, okay?
do we mail them together?
Um, I don't know, I would send two, just see if,
Wait, I'm confused.
we talked about setting the rent, right? And then overcharge, two different things, right? And so if you want to, definitely want to set the rent through the fair market rent appeal, no matter what. But if you believe you've been overcharged, also, you can submit the same thing, but, you know, say you want an overcharge. So two applications. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I don't know. I was speaking to the housing director about a month ago. I got one. He said you can put the two. That's interesting.
I think that's probably right, but but-
Right, it's safer to do two.
just,
But they want 99 copies of everything.
the thing is that, only the fair market rent appeal is subject to this 90-day limitation, okay? To challenge what the base rent is. So you could try to do it as one, and if the DHCR says, well, we're not doing it that way, you wouldn't be barred from submitting later on the rent overcharge application separately. But, you know, I mean, it's like belt and suspenders, right? Like, you know, you want to, you know, it costs you a little extra in copying and postage. You know, maybe it's worth doing it just to make sure you're covered.
Last question. Is it okay for them to like, the water and sewage? Like if we don't have separate meters, they just go by like the building and how many people divide it or how many apartments, by how many buildings. Apartments, and that's how they go. For the water and sewage.
Yeah.
That didn't do that. But even though they were just like in our building, they broke a water main. And they let it run for 3 days. And there's hoses outside for maintenance to use that's on ours. And there's washers in all of the buildings that you pay for, but the water is still part of what we're being paid, we're being charged.
What did the lease say about how this was gonna be, if anything, how it's gonna be charged?
It doesn't say.
There's a formula.
Yeah.
like, there's only one of me and one of her. But my neighbors next door, there's a 4 or 5 in the apartment.
I get-
Whether they gave the office the notification that the 5 of them were, or just 2 of them. So we're paying like 35 plus a month for a single person.
Yeah, I get it.
There's no formula. They don't give us.
No, but what is it, what's it,
There
what-
was in the
hold on.
past, there was before.
what's in the lease? What does the lease say?
So now I'm gonna answer that.
Yeah.
The previous owner gave us a form with the formula, the percentage of how many people are in the household and what that percentage is. The new owner has not given us that.
Yeah,
So,
this one just says, it's a little too short. Water and sewer charge will be billed as a separate charge added to rent.
right, they did not give us the formula of how they came to that calculation.
Because they don't know. They don't ever tell us what the whole bill is and then what our percentage is. There's nothing like that. It's just a statement saying, this is what you owe. No way of knowing if it's accurate or not.
Last
Yeah.
year, I had mentioned and I have 2 months. Now, yes, I understand that it's coming, I am responsible to pay someone. But I wasn't home for 2 months. And I was getting, and when I questioned it, they told me that was a problem.
Yeah.
That I would still have to pay that $35, $37 a month.
Yeah,
Still not right.
And I did not do anymore.
yeah. I'd have to do a little research on it. It's not a problem I've encountered before. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
It might not change, but isn't there a law that, a landlord has to at least attempt to pay for a parking every 5, 6 years? I lived in Stony Brook for 24 years. In the apartment I'm in now, I've been there for like 10.
Yeah, no, there's, in New York City, there is. It's called the Housing Maintenance Code, but I'm not aware if there's a similar provision in case.
I would just add about all these other issues that are not, right, like money that you pay to them specifically. Specifically, if you're living at Stony Run, right, we do have a Stony Run tenants union. We are meeting with the landlords soon, like next week, right? Yes. Yeah. So if you have, I'll just say this now, if you are a Stony Run resident and you have not filled out one of these forms, please do so by then tonight is what we're gonna be bringing to the landlords to talk about what's going on, right? So if you're a Stony Run tenant, please stop by here, because what they have said to us, you know, take it however you want, they've told us that they're willing to use their remaining maintenance funds on the issues that we identify for them, right? So,
It's December.
right, so we are, like, for, you know, like, they're a general fund or whatever, so,
Back up.
Right.
3 months, come January.
write that down, right?
They changed boards,
Okay.
but they took my baseboard away, and I'm still going to put my baseboard.
Right, well, that is something I wanna know, right? And I think that's something that we can bring to
And
them,
flat stuff, they're telling me it's not mold, but it's mold off my shower curtain.
right?
Actually seeing the owners, the two people that own it.
Yeah, so basically, who is from Stony Run, raise your hand.
Oh, my goodness. yeah, for the-
Okay, keep your hand up if you have not been to a Stony Run meeting. Okay, so these folks here, I think basically the context is that we've had 2 Stony Run meetings, tenant meetings, the organizing committee and myself went to their office in Beacon, the 2 owners, and we talked to them directly. We had an over an hour-long conversation. We posted it on YouTube. We have a Facebook group for the tenant union that we can add you in and you can look at the video. They made a few commitments to us in person that we are now trying to hold them to, right? So it is a process that we're, you know, gonna go through, and if they don't, then we can organize together and collectively decide how we wanna go about it.
No, well, I just wondered if it was them or.
We met with them and they're sending one of their,
I was
yeah,
there.
They were there.
yeah, and they're sending one of someone who works for them to meet with us, but for the owners, not for them, yeah.
Would you be wise to ask them why don't they just recoup the thousand rents?
That, yeah, I did ask
Yeah,
them
that
that,
question.
we did ask them that, yeah, we did ask them that, and we can get into their responses, we don't need to talk about it right now.
Now, the landlord is.
Yeah, so why don't, if you're a Stony Run person, why don't you stay after if you have questions for me about Stony Run specific stuff, I wanna make sure we use Michael's time well about the FMRA stuff specifically, and we can talk about that. I think any of these like conditions and things like that, these are things that we're gonna have to, you will have to organize for as tenants, right? To fight for these changes, like not all of this is gonna be able to be resolved through this process, right? So I'll pass it back, but I think let's keep our questions like specifically about this. I want to just acknowledge that it's like 8 o'clock now, and we still have to talk about the lawsuit. So we can also, you know, in January, we're going to be doing, I haven't figured out how we're going to do this, but we're going to try to do some sort of like ongoing process of helping y'all fill these out. So we can always get into like the real nitty gritty weeds of your specific cases then. So let's like maybe keep the general questions now, and then if we can move through those, I can like talk about the lawsuit. Marcy, who's representing tenants, is on the line waiting for us. So whenever we're ready to move on to that, like we can do that. So yeah.
We have a question back there for a while, so go ahead. Well, I mean, you don't need a lease right now, right? You're rent stabilized. If they're gonna offer you anything, it should be a rent stabilized renewal lease, right? But they're not doing that, I assume, right? What's been offered to you, I'm sure, is not a rent stabilized lease. Yeah, it's not, it's definitely not. And so, I would, right now, based on the judge's decision in this pending case. The situation is that all of the rent stabilized, potentially rent stabilized tenants are going to be treated as month-to-month tenants going forward. I will tell you that I did have a conversation today with the attorney for the landlord group in that case. Oh, it's about, yeah, the attorney, his name is Matthew Brett from a firm named Belkin Burton. And I know Matt for many years. And we had a conversation about the case because I saw the judge's interim decision to be a little bit ambiguous on a couple points about particularly as to whether or not the landlords could seek to evict tenants. Because the decision basically said that the landlords don't have to renew your leases, and that you will be entitled to continued possession or continued occupancy as month-to-month tenants. Okay, so you're entitled to continued occupancy as month-to-month tenants. Well, month-to-month tenancy can be terminated on 60 or 30 or 60 or 90 days notice. So I asked him, I said, so what's the deal, right? Like, are you guys gonna start trying to evict the tenants? And, he was pretty clear with me that that's not their intention. So I think for now, that you're just not gonna get leases. They're gonna treat you as month-to-month tenants ongoing. You shouldn't expect that you're gonna get leases. You're not gonna get rent stabilized leases, certainly. And it'll be sort of status quo like that until all of this is sorted out.
I'll just add that in the city of Kingston, we also have good cause eviction, right, which is a law that protects tenants from unjust, no cause evictions. That law, of course, basically the Newburgh version of this law was just overturned like a week ago, right? So the Kingston law is still standing. I don't know if there's been a lawsuit. So, I think it will probably stay solvent through this legal process. But it's obviously hard to tell exactly how things will.
Yeah, and if the landlords start hitting everybody with termination notices, then there's things that can be done at that point. Like you could try to intervene in this lawsuit. Frankly, like, you could go after the landlords for violating the judge's order, because I think the judge, he doesn't, I don't think he expects that the landlord is going to use this as an opportunity to start evicting tenants. So, it would look real bad for them, if they try to do that. So it's something to keep an eye on, but I don't expect that's going to be something that happens. Are you in a building that has more than 6 units? Okay. As your landlord, I don't know if they're aware of the rent stabilization.
Didn't someone bring their R1 form? Okay, wait, I think Okay, are there any other general questions on how to file these paperwork that are general and not like case specific? Yes.
If you go to the agent office and you ask for this RR1 form, do they have to give it to you?
No, I mean,
So you would I think what we talked about earlier is asking the state agency
Yeah.
to send it to you.
I
And
was told to go to the office and ask for one. When I got there, she said, I don't know why they're sending you guys that.
Yeah, they don't have. They come either in the mail, so the landlord registers with the state, and the state mails you the letter.
And they come certified.
They come certified, and if you didn't get it, you can check with the post office.
The post office don't have it.
Okay,
So
and then you can call them, and you can call the government agency, and they will mail it to you. Correct.
that is D is the department, is HCR, DHCR is the department, so. Where we were talking about after this, looking into what the best way of requesting that is, whether it's an email or a phone call, but I'll follow up and then the follow-up email or text from this meeting. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Wait, one more question, can I?
You really deeply appreciate it. Are there maybe?
One
Sorry,
more question,
one more question, okay.
really quick. So
Yeah,
I never got the letter from the landlord, so you're saying to go to the
HCR.
Okay, so once I speak to them and they send me the letter, is it 90 days from that letter they send me? Or from when it originally started back in November, the beginning of November?
They're not gonna send you the RR1, they're gonna send you the rent registration history for the.
Oh. Okay, all right,
But
thank you.
That document should show the date
That they
that,
sent it.
that it was sent to the DHCR.
Okay,
So that would, the 90 days presumably would run from then. Well, actually not, it would run from when you were received, but you would know that it would have been registered, but just that you hadn't received it yet.
okay,
So
Some of them went back.
you would want to just start getting your form ready.
all right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Do you want me to stick around or?
You can, yeah. I mean, this next part will only be like 5-10 minutes, less than that, honestly. Okay, so what I'm